And we are up. Good evening, everyone. It's Matt with Downrange Firearms. I'm here with Ben Joint today. We've done this video before. Class is coming up next weekend. We wanted to jump on this one and get as many people involved and notified. So if you're not familiar with the classes we have upcoming, Ben's coming into town to kind of run those. I'll be in and out and assisting when available. But I brought him in. I'm going to let him do his little intro and bio if for some reason you haven't heard of this before. And then we're going to start talking about what these classes are involved and what they entail, and then why you should be paying attention and taking them because they important. Ben,
All right. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for having me on. I always have a great time coming up there and teaching. I've been a instructor in the defense/tactical industry for a couple of years. I started teaching in the U.S. Army. I've taught anything from tactical courses. I've taught quite a few leadership courses and things like that. And I've done some training outside the Army too. I've taught quite a few pistol classes and things like that. And one of the biggest things that I thought that people were really that there was like a niche for is what are all of the steps leading up to actually using your firearm. And people say, well, I'm going to get a carry permit, I'm going to get a gun, I'm going to take some classes, I'm going to train with using that. The issue with that being is if you only train to fight, you're going to get really good at fighting. And what we want to do is we want to get really good at awareness, avoidance, and de-escalation. So we're not getting to that point. Now, the vast majority of altercations do not end in any sort of firefight, any sort of conflict of any kind. So learning how to see bad situations before they happen, and then learning how to deal with those situations as they're unfolding to where you're not getting in those. So the thing is regardless of what your physical altercation looks like, if you ever do get in one, the total cost of a fight is a really big deal. So your average self-defense shooting costs about $50,000, whether you're right or wrong. Now we are assuming that you're right, that you are 100% completely justified. You're still going to spend about $50,000 in legal fees avoiding that charge. So how do we get out of that, right? So our goal is not to win fights. Our goal as armed citizens is to live our life without being inconvenienced or victimized. And so what this course does is it teaches you all of those things going up to having to use deadly physical force, and actually how to take certain situations in which you may have to use deadly physical force and how to get out of having to do that. So there's no such thing as someone who wins a fight, because you don't come out of a fight without getting hit. The only way that you can win a fight is to actually avoid the fight, because once you get in the fight, there's only varying degrees of loss, right? So the thing that I always tell everybody, I actually watched a really good buddy of mine. He got in he actually got in an altercation. The altercation was not his fault. He did a little bit to try to talk his way out of it, but then at a certain point, he was just like, well, if you want to fight, let's go ahead and do this. And this guy threw, the other guy actually tried to hit him first. He threw the worst, slowest haymaker, and my buddy dodged it, and literally, the guy's like, not quite UFC level, but he did do some professional fighting. And he knocked this guy clean out. And this guy probably woke up with a headache, and he probably had a headache for a day or two. my buddy broke a hand. He actually broke two different bones in his hand, and his hand was in a cast for weeks. And so, did he actually win that fight? No, he actually lost because he lost more than the guy that he hit, right? Because that guy's head stopped hurting long before my buddy's hand was healed up. So, if we can get to a place to where we are learning how to talk our way out of these fights, learning how to avoid situations that would end there, we can mitigate the vast amount of situations. And so I talk a lot about what our goal is, and our goal is, like I say, it's to win fights that are not avoidable, right? But to try to make as many avoidable fights not happen as we possibly can.
Yep. 100, yeah. 100, I love all of that for that description. Before we keep trucking, just if you're tuning in right now, we have a couple people watching right now, a few likes right now. Seriously, you guys have any questions, commentary, what ifs? This is the time to jump on it while we're both here. We're kind of acting in the role of an open forum, so we want that feedback from everybody. So if you have questions, jump them in there, toss them in there. The reason I keep looking away today is I'm sending notes to people that I know that have discussed some interest in this, to throw them a tag, throw them a message, whatever, to see if we can get some people jumping in here as the conversation moves on.
If anybody has any questions, maybe about situations that maybe they currently have ongoing, or things that they've gone through in the past, whether it's any sort of like, let's say any sort of like stalking, bullying, any sort of online stuff, like an online stalking, any sort of questions like that. I've worked with quite a few people that have been in those situations, so feel free.
But kind of going off of what Ben was mentioning too about avoiding situations you can when you're able, just because you're, well, like he said, and maybe this is paraphrasing what he's already kind of said, and it kind of where it is, just because you're justified in doing something and taking action doesn't mean you always should. Because ultimately, what is your mission in life? Ignoring pride, because pride is a huge component here. What is your mission in life? Is your mission in life to right every wrong, moral, ethical, and otherwise? Because if the answer to that is no, then why are you letting your pride get you into trouble? Kind of, let's quote the original Top Gun, your body's cashing checks your ass can't cash. Same kind of animal. Just because somebody does deserve to get punched in the mouth, are you gaining anything by punching that person in the mouth? If you're stopping some sort of actual legitimate criminal activity, bad behavior, whatever, that needs correcting, that's one thing. All right. I would never, ever advocate for somebody to be victimized. Quite the opposite, especially because our conversation earlier. That being said, if there's ways to avoid confrontation in situations before it even starts, heck yeah. But once it crosses that line, absolutely. Violence of action and all the wonderful things that go through it, that's all lawfully and legally justified.
Yes.
That's the stuff you kind of want to pay into. And I'm going to throw this one out for posterity, because anybody who took the if you were in class last night when we did our home defense class, I tell some messed up stories and I say some screwed up stuff sometimes, but that's coming from a place of experience and a lot of introspection. You need to you need to figure out what you're doing, how you respond to certain circumstances in your life, and what justifies those actions. If somebody's trying to murder you, I'd like to think you're willing to use deadly force against them. If somebody is calling you names, what are you willing to do to deal with that? Walk away, get into a fight, whatever. We talked about with home defense. Though legally this might not be defensible, if somebody breaks into my home and steals a nickel, I got zero ethical issues with shooting them in the face, just from the sheer fact that I don't care about the nickel. I care about them violating the sanctity of my home. I should be able to feel safe in my home when I come home. I should be able to kick back, sit in my PJs, and not have to worry about somebody coming through the door. The moment somebody does, You have violated the sanctity of my home. That is substantially worse than stealing the nickel. Don't care about the nickel. Now, that being said, we just had a 2-minute conversation about smoke checking a dude over a nickel. These stories get dark sometimes, but you got to understand that what we're talking about isn't meant to be about just factual. Hey, you should do this. You shouldn't do this. You should avoid this. You should avoid this. You need to take moral and ethical stands on some things. That being said, if there are simple things you can do to avoid victimization, it's kind of a good one. In the case of home defense, putting 3.5-inch deck screws, better quality deadbolts in a full security, high security plate, and then screwing your hinges into the wall would prevent somebody from easily kicking in your house. You should spend the $3 and do all of those things, because if somebody does try to and fails to get in, I'm going to feel even better with the sanctity of my home.
Avoidance. You have just avoided that fight. By doing all of that stuff, you put all kinds of stuff in between them and the bad things that you would do to them, right? So you are actively trying to get out of that fight. If someone breaks into my home, I'm not going to have a conversation with them about what they're there to do. If they are inside my home, and I am going to assume that they are there for nothing but bad things. And there is legal doctrine that backs that up. If they have feloniously broken into my home, if they have broken locks to get in there, I am right in assuming that I am in fear for my life or serious bodily injury. And we're not going to be de-escalating anything. Now, if I pull my gun up, they have until I get that safety off and actually start working the trigger to get in a very submissive posture, to the point to where, no, maybe they don't need this. But good luck with that.
Hey, sometimes they just want to play the room temperature challenge.
Yes.
It's the nature of the beast. But
so the other part of actually de-escalating things is fighting is sometimes de-escalating things, because if someone is inside of my home and I'm in there, I have my kids there, if you were to ask my kids, did your dad de-escalate the situation? Yeah, he got the bad man out. He made the bad man stop. So yes, I did de-escalate the situation. But sometimes words don't always work, and so we have to communicate our boundaries in the most primal form of communication. The most primal form of communication is basically
punch in the mouth.
Punch in the mouth, shooting. It's basically violence as a whole. Violence is enforcing your boundaries and communicating no, right? It is something that everyone speaks pissed off a guy with a gun. Every single person on earth, and I have been in situations where there was a massive language barrier, right? We did not speak the same language at all, right? They didn't understand what I was yelling at them, but they understood that I was very unhappy with what was going on. Something about me and like 12 other dudes with guns pointing guns at them, and they were like, "Oh, we're not supposed to be here." Like, yeah.
And sometimes de-escalating argument or poor behavior is a matter of just being the scariest mother effer in the room, or the vicinity, being scarier, angrier. Because if I go to 11, I have the self-control to bring it back down to a 6.
Yes.
Somebody else acting the fool, I don't necessarily have control over that, other than to reach a level that makes them realize that they're not the big cheese in that conversation or that environment, because law enforcement deals with like crazy. Everybody wants to take it. We're trying to de-escalate. We're not trying to escalate. We're trying to calm everybody down. And even if somebody else is screaming or acting the fool or whatever, they're trying to, casually bring them down by, hey, this is the level I want you to be at. Come meet me here. And some people are just dicks, to put not too fine a point on it. Some people are absolutely just dicks. And the solution to that is, all right, I'm at a 3. you're at like a 9, I'm going to come at you at an 11 and say, you calm down, or you're going to deal with me on a totally different environment and level. And a lot of
Yes.
times that will actually get them. And sometimes that happens where it's literally just, we're going to test you. We're going to see what you're willing to uh, take from me. And like you said, you set that boundary and you kick it to 11, and they go, all right, we'll take it down to a 3 now.
So slide, actually, I was just rolling through my slide deck here. When verbal communication is failing, right? And I'll just kind of go over the highlights here. Being polite will not get you out of every situation. When you perceive that a situation cannot be politely de-escalated, de-escalated impolitely, right? So we like to always maintain a era or a aura of being nice and being kind and respectful to every single person.
Where's the
Because
Roadhouse video when we need it?
right, we don't treat people how they are. We treat people how we are, right? So I'm going to address people in a calm and polite manner because I'm a calm and polite person, not necessarily because they are. But if that is not going to de-escalate the situation, sometimes by establishing dominance inside of that interaction, and we have lots of ways to do that. We have tools to do that. We teach you how to use your voice, your body posture, some other things. When you take the dominant role inside of that situation, and they understand that, hey, this person that I'm being this way towards, they're willing to run this all the way into the end zone. Maybe I don't want to go there, because if they're at an 8 and they won't come back down to a 4, you staying at a 3 is not going to help you out. Sometimes you need to go to 11 or 12, right? And then when they show that, like, maybe I don't want to do this, then you bring it back down together, right? And then you've taken that situation and you've brought it back down.
I mean, yeah, because then you maintain control. When you get to be the big dick, you maintain control, which is ultimately what you want in these environments. Because in theory, you're not antagonizing circumstances that are going to lead to gunfights, because that makes you a bad guy.
You are reacting to a situation that is already losing control. And what you're doing and what you can articulate doing is, hey, everything that I did up until this point, because you kind of have to think about, what if you are explaining your actions in court, right? Because if you use this and things do come off of the rails, you're going to end up in court, and there's going to be some very not nice people trying to trip you up and getting you to say what actually happened. Now, just to kind of back up a bit, if they say, well, you say that you got a gun for personal protection, but that's your last resort, right? So that's your last option. What's your first option? And you're like, well, just try not to get in fights. And it's like, oh, okay, well, like, what comes after that? Like, well, be nice to people.
Hopefully not shoot him in the face.
Right? And it's like, oh, okay, so, like, what comes after that? Well, maybe, like, show somebody that I have it, maybe pull it out and not necessarily use it, or, like, shoot him in the leg. Like, you may say something really dumb like that. If you ever use that, never say you shot at someone's leg, ever. That's not legal advice for legal purposes for me, but don't.
Take a use of force class.
Yes, take a use of deadly physical force class.
I need to write that class. Remind me to do that in the next couple of weeks, Ben, because I'm technically certified to do that now.
One thing that this class will be able to do, right? And if you can't really articulate this, you're going to get tripped up into saying that your gun was your only option, and that is what is going to happen. So you've got all kinds of other tools that you can have, but if you can spend 15 to 20 minutes articulating awareness, avoidance, de-escalation, all of the steps that you took inside of that, then they're going to be like, wow, this guy really, like this guy or girl really spent a ton of time learning this, right? And did everything that they could to avoid the fight, right? Now, whether you're in a stand your ground state or whether you're not, the better that you can articulate that you didn't want to be in that fight and you did everything in your power to not be in that fight and to keep that fight from happening, right? That's actually going to keep you out of fights, so it's going to decrease the likelihood that you'll ever be in the witness stand,
Yeah.
right? And then two, if you actually end up there, you're going to have something to say, and that may be, like that could very well be the determining factor in whether or not you leave the courthouse free, or whether you get hemmed up on any sort of like manslaughter charge or, God forbid, murder charge.
Before we go further than that, pop quiz. Anybody watching? We've got 8, but we've been bouncing between 8 and 11 here for the past couple of minutes. Those of you watching, I'm assuming you're in Illinois. He mentioned stand your ground states. Pop quiz, boys and girls. Is Illinois a stand your ground state? If you don't know, throw up a guess if you're not sure. Any takers? Come on now. There's a couple of people watching here. We've got at least 7 people that have been popping in that have actually hit the like, and I know a couple of you guys are actively watching. Throw it out there. Are we a stand your ground state or not?
Stand your ground.
You're a Kentucky man. You feel free to take a guess, and then maybe by the time we do, we'll
actually
take a guess and see how you feel about that one.
I've got a guess, and regardless if there is a stand your ground law or not, I'm going to try to de-escalate the fight. Stand your ground really helps when you don't have a lot of time to actually de-escalate the fight, when the fight just happens.
Yes.
And so not every circumstance is going to allow you the opportunity to actually try to talk somebody down. There was just something that happened in the great state of Kentucky. There was a guy, I think it was a Monday morning, the guy's eating breakfast, getting ready to go to work, right? Some guy comes through his back door and unlocked his back door via chainsaw, right? I mean, this is like, this guy is not at 11 or 12. This guy's at like 18, right? This guy didn't come in to steal anything. This guy was on enough meth to power a rocket ship. And he comes in the house with a chainsaw and just charges the homeowner, right? That's not the time to talk to people, right? The only way that you're de-escalating is not by winning hearts and minds, but you're going to start putting rounds on hearts and minds. And you're going to be changing people's mind, not verbally, but more of in like a manual fashion.
Right, what's your guess here?
My guess is that Illinois is not a stand your ground state.
Illinois is a stand your ground state.
I was wrong. I am happy to be wrong.
We are a stand your ground state. The actual terminology that's in there is no duty to retreat.
Yes.
That's their terminology. Just like we're also a castle law state. It's limited castle law, but we are a castle law state, which people do not realize. Surprisingly, despite the fact that we are in the communist capital of the Midwest, we are surprisingly very, very friendly to self-defense rulings.
Right. So when it comes to things like the castle doctrine, inside of your home, if you feel confident enough in a situation to try to de-escalate something inside of your home, more power to you. But if someone is in your home, if they've come in a locked door, and especially if they have any sort of weapon, one of the things that I talk about is some fights cannot be talked down first. There is a time to talk about things, and there's a time to go straight to using force. And while I don't necessarily go into specifics on that because every situation is different. What's great about this class is I'm not giving you, well, if A happens, do B. If B happens, do C. The reason being is I'm not training you to take a multiple choice test, right? I'm training you to think, right? And you have to understand the concepts, because once you understand awareness, avoidance, and de-escalation on a conceptual level, then once you get essentially the base level of knowledge, you're going to be able to build on that, and then you're going to be able to make good decisions for the situation that you're in personally. Because every situation is going to be different, and this is something I say. I say this all the time when I'm teaching Pistol 1 and Pistol 2. You better be learning this stuff, and you better get it right, because I'm not going to be there for your gunfight, right? I'm not going to be there to tell you to gas up your gun. I am not going to be there to walk you through how to clear a Type 3. That's something that you're going to have to do on your own. But so what this class is doing is giving you a lot of stuff in terms of how to determine body language, how to gauge people's mental states, how to see bad situations before they happen. Because once you get really good at this, your friends are going to think you have a superpower. Like, you are going to be able to see bad situations before they happen. You're going to be able to see them because you're going to see all of the ingredients of human behavior inside of that situation. And you're going to be able to say, well, I know what all those add up to. And if there's just a triggering event, then I know that this thing here is going to happen. And seeing that beforehand actually gives you options, right? And once you learn to see those situations and to kind of dissect the social cues that are in there, and you can see where that situation is headed, that gives you time to actually decide what you're going to do. If you're just going to avoid the situation by going somewhere else, if you're going to stay and be like, if anything happens, I can, try and talk my way out of it. I can just kind of keep myself out of it because, these two other people are getting ready to fight. This other thing is happening. Or you gauge that the attention of the bad situation is not necessarily on you, and you say, hey, I can just keep my head down and I can get through this. So you're going to have those options. So when something does pop off, and when things pop off, they happen fast, right? So if you notice something bad happening while it's happening, right? Hopefully it's not happening to, you don't have time to respond to that situation. You have time to react, right? Reacting is bad, responding is good. The difference in reacting and responding, you react to getting punched in the face. You react to something bad happening to you. If you can see that happening beforehand and you've had time to think about it, you've had time to go through your entire process of observing, orienting, deciding what you're going to do, and then you're waiting on that trigger event to put your plan into action, you already have a response on speed dial, and it's a well thought out response. So it's the response that puts you in the most advantageous position for this. And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to set you up for success before the fight happens, right? And that basically sums it up. If I had to say that the one thing that this class will do to you, or will do for you, is it will set you up for success before the fight starts. And by setting you up for success, it will give you the opportunity to get out of the fight.
Yeah, because and a huge thing that I just want to make sure everybody's clear on, because Ben hit it. Situations move fast when they start moving. The big thing that people realize or don't realize is things start moving fast when people hit the action phase. but there's usually a whole lot of pre-incident indicators that we're going to cover in this class. That's a huge
Yes.
chunk of what we talk about with the situational awareness side, is looking for pre-incident indicators, because the reality is, I don't care how dynamic a circumstances are, they start slow, incredibly slow, because they're waiting for a triggering event. But while they're waiting for a triggering event to rob someone, fight someone, whatever the circumstances may be, we don't pick your incident, just, for the sake of example. There is typically indicators that you're going to get the chance to observe if you're paying attention. Because very rarely does somebody sit there in an alleyway ready to rob somebody, and they're just like, I'm 100% neutral. Oh, magically somebody to rob, and stab them, and then they run off. That's not how the universe works. I don't care how good your offender or how experienced your offender is. There's always some indication of a pre-incident indicator, whether it's just somebody being attentive or what their hand gestures, their behavior, whatever. There are always, generally speaking, and very, very few, I'm never going to say always, but very rarely is it that you don't have any kind of previous indication that you can kind of chase down and track to kind of go, you know what, this is something that needs paying attention to.
Let me give you a pre-incident indicator. I will give you guys some free chicken here. So here is a pre-incident indicator that you see not 5 minutes before the fight, not 10, not 15, not 20. You see this in the person's life before they do something bad, right? This you can see sometimes weeks before something happens. It's actually a personality trait, right? And I'll actually give you a couple. Anytime that someone negotiates the word no, right? So if you set a boundary with someone, and we talk a lot about setting boundaries and things like that, because a lot of people think, well, the person that's going to be coming after me, I'm not going to know them. You actually might, right? There is a reason why the first person suspected when somebody gets killed is actually their spouse, right? We don't like to talk about these things, but anytime that someone you know negotiates your boundaries by trying to jump over the word no, right? So let's say that you know somebody kind of well, and you say, well, yeah, like we're all out in like a big group, we're going out to eat this, that, or the other thing, and you say, you know what, I'm going to have a Sprite. And they're like, no, like you should do shots. Right? And you're like, well, I really don't want to do shots. I'm just really just not in the mood to drink, or like this, that, or the other thing. They're like, well, I already bought you this drink. Drink it. Right? Negotiating the word no. Right? Anytime that somebody does that, that doesn't necessarily mean that something bad's going to happen. But something that you need to know is when somebody negotiates no, they do not respect you at all. At all. Right? So the other thing, when you pair that up with somebody that never takes accountability for their own actions, right? If they do not respect your boundaries, and regardless of anything else that happens in life, they never take personal responsibility for anything else, right? So anything that happens is always someone else's fault. Someone else did this, someone else did that, right? What I'm describing, people feel free to comment if you actually know anybody like that. You don't have to tag them in it, but you're probably thinking of some people.
Yeah,
right?
That's not de-escalation if you tag the person in it.
Yeah.
That's called escalation. Though it can be fun for party trick from time to time, that defeats the purpose of this particular session.
And I'm not saying that you have to yeet that person out of your life entirely. I'm saying you should limit the amount of time you spend with them, because that is a dangerous person.
And control the circumstances in which you do spend time with them.
Yes. Absolutely. So then another pre-incident indicator, and this is, so if you take the first two, right, and then if you pair that up with, well, they brag about losing control. Oh, like they say things like, well, when I get mad, I just see red and I don't know what happens and I'll knock out every single person in the bar, this, that, or the other thing. Bragging about prior loss of control or bragging about losing control and committing an act of violence, right? You have to really understand, what are they telling you? They're actually telling you, I am a dangerous person. And if they don't take accountability for anything that they've done wrong, if they are unable to, say, oh, I messed that up, right? Or, yeah, I really could have handled that better. Or, this thing happened a couple of years back and I was really, really wrong and I'm really sorry that I did that, right? If they're unable to say things like that, they brag about losing control at times. They brag about hurting people, right? And then they don't respect your boundaries. They don't respect no. If you say, no, I don't want to do this, and they're like, but do it anyway, do it anyway, do it anyway, come on. And then they try to guilt you into doing it. You're dealing with a very, very dangerous person, right? And I'm not going to put a label on that personality type, right? Because I'm not a psychologist, right? But what I can tell you is, if I see all three of those traits, I'm spending very, very, very little time with that person, right? Because either A, it's not going to be a very good situation for me to be in, because if they're not going to respect when I say no, or if they're not going to respect any sort of boundary that I put up, then I really don't want to be around that person. Or they're going to do something bad to me, or they're going to do something bad and then they're going to blame it on me, or I'm going to be somehow implemented guilty by association when they do something bad to someone else. So then you get into other indicators that basically, like when you see people getting mad, if they are raising their voice, if their speech is slurred, if they repetitive word use, parroting or echoing, the nervous laugh. Yeah, so like kind of like laughing at like a really inappropriate time. Definitely pre-incident indicators for things. And so these are things that like we teach people to actually look for. And then we also go into something now. If you start seeing these, there's another list of things that you need to start looking for, which is imminent threat indicators, right? So a pre-incident indicator, that could be a personality trait, that could be just an indicator that the situation is sort of getting out of control. When you start seeing imminent threat indicators, that's when you really need not to be at the observe or the orient stage. You need to be in the orient and decide stage. You need to be waiting on that mental trigger in order to take the action that you need to take. Or if you're seeing imminent threat indicators, you can actually start your de-escalation process, and actually going through a process that's called leaps. It's actually very good at taking people from an 8 or a 9 and bringing them back down to a 4. It's very good at keeping people talking, because when people are talking, they're not trying to punch you in the face. If you can keep things on a conversational level, or you can keep communicating with that person on a verbal level and not a primal level, then things are much, much better. But things like personal space violation, standing toe to toe with somebody, if they're pointing their finger at you, if they're making fists, doing the 1,000-yard stare, if they're blocking a exit to a door, if they are using their body to, kind of block you into an area. When the person starts refusing to make eye contact and gets quiet. So you being a retired police officer, right? What do guys do right before they jet?
Oh, they spot the direction of travel.
They stop and they get super, super quiet, and they're like,
they're looking in the direction of their escape route.
they're looking for where they're going to be going, right? And then there's that pause, and it's just like it's like a pause, but it's like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, bolt. You can almost time it with most people because it takes most people's minds about the same amount of time to do that. People do the same thing right before they surprise punch you in the face. The first thing that they'll do is they'll do some grooming actions, right? They'll be super, super loud, then they'll calm down, and then they'll stop talking, right? Then they'll do some grooming actions, and they'll do the right left. And when they do the right left, when they adjust their foot, you've got about 1.5 seconds before you get your head knocked off.
Well, like you mentioned the darting thing, the first thing when you see that is always the first indicator of, oh, I'm just going to put a hand on a bicep.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that'll serve as an interdictor for things that'll be like, okay, let's light this up before, or let's nip this in the butt before they get going. It doesn't necessarily need to be something bad. We're not going to, I don't plan on going like full deep into the OODA loop concept this time. I think we should do a live stream dedicated to that soon. But you want to interrupt somebody's OODA loop, it doesn't necessarily take setting off dynamite in the ear. Sometimes it's something as simple as just going, hey, bud, what are we looking at here? Because the minute you call them on the BS, it slows things down. If somebody's about to knock your block off, then it's time to either A, add distance, or B, close it.
Right. You need to go forward or back, and you need to go one of those two places fast, right? So depending on your role in life, an armed citizen, you're going to go back the vast majority of the time. If you're standing on your own property, you're probably going forward. But if you're working in any sort of job where it's your job to protect people, or if you're, working some sort of security detail, once you get that indicator, that's one of those times that you're going to be closing distance. As an armed citizen, I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to take a bit more of an aggressive posture. And at that point, I'm going to start asking them questions, because I'm going to try to get them thinking again. And if they start closing that distance back towards me, if I create that distance and then they start closing that, that's a hostile action. So at that point, we're into more of something that you would learn inside of a use of force class. But that would be a great time to pull out some mace, be like, hey, if you do that, you are getting sprayed with this. And mace is an awful thing.
I keep waving around the entire time, because I'm a firm believer in carrying intermediate weapon systems. Because when you only have a gun, you kind of touched on it earlier, so I was waving it around, is when you only have a gun, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Being able to understand when the circumstances dictate certain things. And we mentioned closing distance or opening distance. A chunk of this requires understanding a couple of things about human nature. I do not suggest going out there and trying this. If you decide that opening distance is not going to solve the problem, because you can see them gradually heating up, and that your response needs to be angry and aggressive in nature to try to out chimpanzee him and scare him and be the alpha in that situation, your anger cannot be gradually raising. It needs to be dynamic and intense. And I don't mean just reach out and punch him in the face. If you want to have somebody back down just by behavior and posture, it needs to be dynamic and it needs to aggressive. Dynamic and it needs to be extremely aggressive. Again, you're not punching him in the face, but that's where you get big really fast. Your voice goes up, the octave drops, the volume goes way through the roof. Everything puffs up, because you know what I mean. Everybody knows what I mean when I say puffs up. If you need to get in somebody's face and just go, the shoulders get tense, everything, that vein in your forehead pops out, your neck gets all swollen, your chest starts to do that thing that it does when you really start getting aggressive, everything tightens up. It needs to be fast, dynamic, and noticeable. Because in my old occupation, I'd have guys that would 100% try to push me around verbally, not physically, but verbally, because I'm a smaller stature dude. If you've ever seen me, I'm the size of an overgrown fetus. As such, people had felt that they were able to talk down to me, yell at me, act aggressive, puffy, whatever. And if I gradually got more angry, it just turned into we're playing this game, as opposed to, okay, your volume is here and you're trying to bait me. Screw it. We're not playing that game. You're going to do what I want, how I want to. And we mentioned this earlier in the Zoom, where you're going to play that game. I'm going to go right here. It's going to be in your face. It's going to be, I want you to go, where did that come from? That's what I want. I don't want you to get that. And that's effective for a couple reasons. One, it screws up the OODA loop. And on the other side, the first thing that's going through their head is, this dude's psycho. Or capable of being psycho, one of the two. And I want that to be the thought process. I don't want you to be like, all right, I can kind of gradually, and maybe I can take you. I don't want you, as I'm getting angrier, to start assessing anything. I want to be so dynamic that as you're dealing with me, that dynamic action is such that your brain doesn't go, you're not gradually assessing what I'm capable of doing. You just got anger at 11.
So when you do that, you're creating a reactionary pause inside of that person's mind. Now, when that reactionary pause hits, right, you're not like, you're taking all of the momentum that's pushing the situation up. And then that's why that actually works for talking things down, because if you're just gradually going up with people, right, you're actually making the situation worse, because you're getting them comfortable with the situation being at 9, 10, 11, right? And so then they're already comfortable with it being there. But if they're at a 6, then they're at a 7, and then you're at a 12, and they're like, whoa, I wasn't comfortable with this situation going there, then it can all back right down. Now, one of the things, and this is something that I learned in the Army back when we were still yelling at people. The Army is a different world than it used to be. One of the most intimidating things, and I saw it happen a couple times, and I was like, I'm going to get really, really good at that. And it was going from a 2 to a 12 and back to a 2 in the same sentence. And when people can do it, it is the most terrifying thing. You start off at a conversational tone, then you go to where people 150 to 200 yards out can hear every single word that you're saying, and you end off with a whisper. It is haunting. And so
those are the skill set that everybody needs to learn, because Jordan Peterson, it's been blown up all over Jordan Peterson's book, Facebook, the last couple of weeks. He talks about dangerous people that are not dangerous are not good by definition.
Yes.
They can't say, I'm not violent, I'm not dangerous, therefore I'm a good person. No. A good person is somebody capable of being dangerous, capable of being violent, that chooses not to. That ability to go from 2 to 11 to 2 again, those are the best kind of people in the world, but they're also the most terrifying, because those are the ones that have the ultimate level of control and the ability to go from, hey, I'm going to be your best friend until I'm not. And if you want to cut that, we're not going to gradually, why don't you, a little more. No. It's, we're best friends or we're not. You're going to respect me or we're not.
When you get people that have that much control, and they can do that inside of a high stress situation, when they can essentially, what you're letting the other person know is, you can do this in a very kind, and you can do this in a very polite way, but Mr. Hyde is on speed dial, and you can pull him out in the middle of a sentence, and you can put him away like that, right? When people understand that that's the kind of person that they're getting ready to get in an altercation with, they're like, no, no, right? So it's one of the most useful tools that you can use, is actually using your tone of voice, using inflection, using volume. There are lots of situations that just knowing that skill can actually get you out of. the most dangerous people that I know are all extremely calm. And one of the worst things that I wouldn't say it was the worst thing. One of the physical altercations that I got in when I was doing private security details is I went hands-on with a guy that essentially, once we got to that point where I was like, I'm going to physically take you out of this area, he just kind of looks at me, and I knew of the guy. I had actually read a file on him because we were protecting an individual from a known person. And when we got to that point, he was still calm, and he's like, okay, let's, let's do that. And I was like, I am not really looking forward to this because he's very calm inside of this situation. He's not showing anger when he should, which means he's very, very comfortable with this. And thankfully, everything worked out with that situation well. And it actually got ended with mace, but it was not my mace. So turns out my partner, who is macing him, turns out he actually ended up macing both of us. If I could have actually saw my partner, I probably would have fought him too. So
Jared threw out a question here a minute ago, so it's almost borderline like a use of force question, but we're going to cover it anyway. From Jared, if you're going from 4 to 5 to 6, and then you jump to 12 with somebody, and that instant they don't back down, but they act on it, and they take it to 12 and 13 as well to match with you, could this be seen as you being the aggressor if someone is playing Monday morning quarterback in court, etc.? My take on this one initially, and Ben, I'll let you chase me. I'll let you chase me down on this one because I've been quiet for too long. Yes, in theory, they could say that you acted in the aggressive manner in that situation. That being said, this is going to come into how you justify your actions. And this is why, if you've taken our force on force, we put you in court. We tell you, hey, you need to justify what your actions are to the other 7 people in class are your judge and jury. Explain it to them and see if they agree and they think it's rational. If they do, cool. If they think, I don't know, you're probably not going to be right in that situation. Now, if you're saying, hey, this guy's acting aggressive, I've been getting pre-incident indicators, they're doing things to trigger a situation. I got verbally aggressive, because I don't mean necessarily, even if you puff up and all that good stuff, as long as you're not swinging on somebody, if you give them a good solid bark or a good solid yell in response to their aggressive or inappropriate actions, I think you're going to be pretty well covered. Jared, in your case, you're built like pardon my French, but you're built like a brick shithouse. You're 8 feet tall and you're gigantor. You're going to be in a unique situation. Part of this, in my opinion, also too, is learning how to kind of handle some of these situations. For me, dealing with a bigger dude that's staying calm, the demeanor change that would scare me more is less going hyper aggressive, because again, you're already domineering by default. In the case of being a giant domineering dude, having somebody, hey, this is what's going on, and just having him go silent, that scares me. Because if you're dealing with a big dude and you're having this conversation and you're getting more aggressive, and their response is to be like, hey, it's cool, it's no big deal, and all of a sudden they just go,
talking's done.
You're looking at them going, I'm about to get punched in the face. But no court in the world is going to go, yeah, that's clearly a physical indication that you're going to freaking, squash him like a bug.
So my response to that is, can you articulate why you did what you did? Now, when I say going from a 6 to a 12, what I'm not advocating for is I'm not advocating, like, yes, I'm advocating for puffing up. I'm advocating for taking the dominant role inside of the situation. What I'm not suggesting is a personal space violation, getting super, super close to someone or making physical contact with them. So as long as you can articulate why you did what you did. So inside of that situation, if you could say, hey, we were already there. The situation was already getting out of control. I got loud because there is lots and lots and lots of evidence that shows that this is a tactic that can be used to make someone back down out of this situation and to actually avoid the fight, right? So getting loud in and of itself is not necessarily escalating the situation. You're getting louder than they are, and you're taking on more of a sharper tone, and you're being louder and more dominant than they are. But if you can articulate that you're doing that for the purposes of de-escalation, and then you can articulate all of the points. These are the 5 things I tried before this. I went through every single step of verbal judo. I went through every single step of leaps. Nothing was working at this point. I didn't really have the option to go somewhere else. This was kind of my last option before we got to the really, really bad ones. And so this was the last thing that I had in my tool bag before we got to this point. And, the point where, people are actually putting hands on people. And you can say, so I tried being verbally aggressive to dissuade him from being physically aggressive towards me, right? And that didn't work. And then we got into physical altercation, and then all of this other stuff happened. But if you can articulate, I tried all of this other stuff first, awareness, avoidance, de-escalation, verbal judo, leaps, which is leaps. Actually, leaps is a really good thing to actually use inside of relationships as well. It's actually a really, really good parenting tactic. So you listen, empathize, you ask questions about it, you paraphrase it back to them, and then you get into solutions for the situation that you're in. And if you follow that process, and we run people through the process, like you'll practice talking to people using this process and then not actually using the process, and you'll see the difference. And you can literally see people go from really, really mad, like you'll see them go from a 6 and then they'll come right back down to a 3 by using the leaps process. But if you go through all of this stuff and nothing is actually working and you don't have any other options, that's a great way to articulate, hey, I did all of this stuff and nothing actually worked, and this was my last option before we got to the bad options. So,
and I got 2 things to kind of to add to that one, because one of them is, and like you said, this is kind of a last ditch before actually getting physically violent with somebody.
yes.
It's kind of like putting out an oil rig fire. The best way to do it is with dynamite.
Yeah.
Your behavior is dynamite, and what that blowing off that dynamite does, it sucks the oxygen out of their aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, can it blow up in your face? It can. Typically doesn't, but it can. The other thing I'm going to throw out here, and we're kind of talking about it fairly casually because me and Ben have been doing this for a long time. You need to have a very solid understanding of human behavior before you try this technique.
Yes.
If you don't have a really rock solid understanding on human behavior, dynamics, how people react in violent and aggressive situations, this was literally my occupation for 15 years. Ben's been doing this for 15 years as well. Over the course of that stretch, let's be honest, sometimes we may have antagonized some situations, but that's also the reason we're good at what we do, is because we've towed that line and poked that line with a sharp stick enough that, okay, I know when this is an appropriate circumstance. I know the right people, because there are some people that you can go and put out that oil fire with dynamite, and that will work. There are other people that their instinct is going to punch you in the throat instantaneously, and then the fight is on. You need to be a very, very good student of human nature, because like we talked about pre-incident indicators and all the other things that are with that, I need to have a solid enough read based on the body language and the characteristics and the personality of the person I'm dealing with to determine if this will work or this is going to end up with a scrap on the floor. Because there are circumstances, pint size, oversized fetus, right? I 100% violated the personal space ruling because I needed that. I couldn't be 6 feet away, pissed off, and getting my point across. I needed to make that aggressive movement, not with arms raised. Things were low and down, just to make sure there was no confusion. But I needed to do that because, all right, oversized fetus, not menacing even when I'm pissed off. But when I'm closing distance, that's a different animal. And as long as I can keep, and again, we're getting into a whole bunch of body language stuff that's
Yeah.
what we're getting into. But as long as I'm keeping certain parts stoic and unmoving, you're good. When the other stuff, the hands, the balled fists, etc., come up, that there's human responses to human actions and stuff like that. If you know how to control certain ones, you can do certain things. You really can do certain things. Stuff like this and that. People don't like getting poked necessarily, but this isn't confused with this. If you know how to use the body language, you can read somebody else's body language, and God forbid you read their reaction and realize, shit, I need to change gears really quick on a dime. If you've never done it before, that's not the time to learn. That's
Right.
not the time to learn.
So the people that are actually best at this, and this is I have probably listened to somewhere to the tune of, trying to do some quick math here, probably somewhere to the tune of between 750 to 1,000 hours of interviews with people that have spent extremely long periods of time in prison. The best people for reading people are people that have been to prison. And I've actually gained a ton of insight into how career criminals think simply by listening to them talk. That's kind of like a novel thing. Like, hey, I want to study the other team, and people who are career criminals, they are the other team. And I've picked up some really, really interesting things. And so some of the things that we go over in the awareness class, we actually talk about tattoos, and we talk about the different kinds of tattoos and what different tattoos mean. I actually was in a store earlier today, and I looked at the guy's tattoos, and I knew that he had done a relatively long bid in prison, and I knew what state he was from. Simply by looking at his tattoos, because he had his area code tattooed on him. That's very, very popular when people do prison time, because in prisons on the East Coast, West Coast is actually completely different. People basically group together based upon where they're from, and so they'll actually tattoo their area code on them. But so understanding the human behavior of people who are professionally violent, and that is on the good guy side of the house as well as the bad guy side of the house, because the bad guys also train too. So there are indicators that they also look for in victim selection. We talk about that in the awareness class, so that's day one. But if you really want to get into body language, and if you want to just understand in layman's terms how violent people think and what indicators to look for before they get set off, go on YouTube, right? I'm going to give this guy a free plug. Jay Williams, JayWilliams, Let's Live Life. It's Jay Williams, Let's Live Life. The guy just tells stories about crazy stuff that happened while he was in prison. I think he was in prison for 12 years. And he was in a pretty bad one. And to hear this guy talk about reading a room, to hear this guy talk about the body language right before fights happen, you will learn just as much by listening to people like that talk as you will if you took a college course on it. Because why would you want to, or, like, you can listen to somebody who has read books and they understand the material in theory, or you can go right to the source and you can hear these people talk, people that have been in hundreds, if not thousands of fights, because like fighting is just a daily part of life, and they've either seen or been in multiple fights every single week for 15 to 20 years straight, to hear them talk about how fights happen and how they can just feel the energy inside of the pod, like the whole bay that they're in, and how they can feel the energy out on the prison yard, and they can just tell by looking at it, they can tell if something's about to happen. There's a ton of that stuff that I've actually put in this course. And I would highly, highly recommend that people who are studying body language definitely listen to people that have lived that kind of life on both sides. So listen to the people that have been the good guys for years, and listen to the people that have been the bad guys for years, and then you're really going to get a good concept of it. There's also a book that I recommend. It was written by an FBI profiler. It's called "I Can Read You Like a Book." The cover has a guy in a white shirt and he's crossing his arms.
Great book.
Fantastic book. Super, super, super great stuff there.
You know what? We've been going for over an hour now.
All right.
I think we'll wind this one down. Everybody, thanks for tuning in that did watch. The comments, the likes. We got some good conversation, some how-to stuff. Ben, always good conversation. So the big
takeaway, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, guys, the big takeaway is the class is coming up. It's next weekend. If you haven't signed on for it, seriously, sign on for it and jump into it. You'll get more direct FaceTime. John, appreciate it. You'll get more FaceTime with both of us. Chance to ask some questions. Because we have been there and we have done this on more than a few occasions over the course of our lives and careers. Jump into those classes because we want to keep having those grow. If we get small enrollment, low enrollment, or God forbid no enrollment, which has happened on a couple of classes this year, eventually they're going to start fading away, or they're going to be so rare it's going to be tough to jump into them. Mm-hmm. Jump into them. The more you take, the more they'll evolve too, because this class is already different than the last time we did it. Me and Ben have already discussed some of the things. We've altered some themes, approved some things, changed some things, removed some things. These are not one-time courses by any stretch, and we've had some pretty in-depth discussions about wanting to do some very interactive things, like going out into the real world, into bars, into restaurants, and things like that, and starting to learn how to do this stuff real world, not just we're going to sit in a classroom for 6 to 8 hours and we'll read about it. We want to start doing that, but if we don't get people that are willing to sign on for these classes, that progression will never happen, because we're not going to take you to a bar after 2 hours of classroom and go, hey, by the way, we're going to start reading a room and figuring out what you can do, what you can't do, watching people's dynamic and interaction between each other. We're not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. It's a waste of time. That's just paid for people watching, and nobody wants to do that. I can go to the bar and do that myself. We want to teach you legitimate skills and let you learn, read people's body language, and all that good jazz, but that requires that foundation. So if you thought about it, you're interested in that one, jump into that class, because it's going to be a hoot. It's always a great time. We keep it fun. If you've ever taken my classes before, I keep them lively. Ben's more professional, but still hilarious.
I actually do stand-up comedy too, so I always have a bunch of one-liners.
Can confirm. And they're not even dad jokes, which is the best part. But definitely sign on. Those classes are going to be a great time. They're $100 a piece, Saturday and Sunday. They're 2 different courses. You can take one, you can take the other, you can take them both. I highly suggest taking both. There's a ton of great information. It would suck to miss it. Trust me on this one. They're a great class. And, Ben is, he's about to go human traffic himself here next, after that class is over, to another country. So we need to take advantage of local.
Yes. So after this course, this is going to be the last course that I teach at Downrange for the better part of a year. I've got to go back out into the field and do this stuff in a operational way and not a classroom way. So I will be out there doing that, and as soon as I get back, I'm going to be booking more courses and everything. The one thing that I would recommend, you can also bring your friends to this course. You can bring your spouse. This would also, so in the avoidance stage, we talk a lot about there are some adult things in it. So we do talk about different kinds of assault. There are some there is a trigger warning for one section of the class where we talk about pre-incident indicators of sexual assault and things like that. And we do talk about some things like that. But that is absolutely useful info. And we need to be talking about this stuff to make sure that people don't fall victim to these people that are out there that actually prey on people. So if you have people that you feel could benefit from that, definitely bring them to this course. We really want people to get out there and to be safe and to go about their lives without falling victim to the bad people out there.
So everybody, thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully we see you in the shop in the next week, getting you signed up for classes. And everybody, go ahead and have a great night.